In the misty hollows of eastern Kentucky's Appalachian Mountains, where the dense canopy struggles to let sunlight pierce through and civilization feels centuries away, lies a dark chapter of American history many have tried to forget. The legend of the cave demons was created when inbreeding produced the most cursed clans of Kentucky. Between 1887 and 1912, a disturbing pattern emerged within the isolated coves and valleys of Harlan County, a pattern that would forever mark the region's legacy and spawn whispers of what locals would later call the cave demons. First settling in these remote hollows shortly after the Civil War was the Blackburn clan. From a rapidly changing America, they were seeking isolation. Led by Patriarch Ezekiel Blackburn, a Confederate veteran haunted by the horrors of battle, the family retreated deep into the limestone cave systems honeycombing the region. "The outside world has nothing for us now," Ezekiel reportedly told his 5 children in 1868 as they established their homestead, carving out a primitive existence in the shadow of the mountains. What began as a family's retreat from society would evolve over 4 decades into something far more disturbing. The first encounters with members of the clan are documented in historical records from the Presbyterian mission established in nearby Coal Creek, from the spring of 1891. Individuals of unusual appearance and demeanor are described in missionary journals, individuals who would occasionally emerge from the eastern hollows to trade for essential supplies. "They walk with an unsteady gait, their features distorted in ways that suggest more than mere hardship," wrote Reverend Samuel McPherson in his mission records. Several display fingers fused together like claws, while others possess eyes that seem unable to focus in unison. Their speech is labored and difficult to comprehend as though their tongues cannot properly form words. Recently digitized by historians at the University of Kentucky, county records from the period revealed that by 1896, the original Blackburn family had expanded through intermarriage with the neighboring Harper clan, creating a tightly woven community of approximately 37 individuals spanning 3 generations. Largely avoiding the area, census takers marked several remote homesteads on official maps simply as not accessible. The first comprehensive documentation came in 1903 when Dr. William Evans, a physician with training from Edinburgh University, accompanied tax collectors into the region. Preserved in the Kentucky Historical Society archives, his medical journal contains detailed observations that modern geneticists have identified as classic manifestations of generational consanguinity. The younger members of these families display concerning physical characteristics, Dr. Evans wrote. Prominent among these are malformed facial features with jaws either severely underdeveloped or protruding beyond normal parameters. Many exhibit spinal deformities causing them to hunch forward, and several children appear to suffer from diminished mental capacity, unable to perform simple arithmetic or recite the alphabet despite being of school age. Most disturbing in Evans' account was his documentation of what he called the advanced cases, 3rd-generation members of the clan who rarely emerged from the deeper cave dwellings. According to Evans, these individuals scarcely resembled typical humans in their movements and vocalizations, having adapted to a troglodytic existence in the perpetual darkness of the limestone caverns. Providing few opportunities for these isolated families was the local economy of early 20th century Kentucky, dominated by coal mining and subsistence farming. The growing whispers among neighboring communities further reinforced their separation from mainstream society. Noted by folklore researcher Dr. Elizabeth Coulson in her 1976 retrospective analysis Appalachian cultural isolation patterns was that by 1905, the term, cave demons, had entered local vernacular to describe the Blackburn Harper clan. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. You won't find these hidden historical truths anywhere else. Only here are America's darkest family secrets being revealed with scientific accuracy and unflinching honesty. Significantly evolved in the centuries since these events has the scientific understanding of what occurred in those Kentucky hollows. A clinical perspective on what contemporary observers could only describe in terms of physical appearance and behavior is now provided by modern genetic research. When closely related individuals produce offspring, the risk of recessive genetic disorders increases dramatically, explains Dr. Howard Garrison, geneticist at Johns Hopkins University. First cousin marriages increase the risk of congenital defects by approximately 1.7 to 2.8% above the population baseline. With multiple generations of close intermarriage, these risks compound exponentially. The historical record suggests that by the fourth generation of the Blackburn-Harper clan, which emerged around 1910, the genetic consequences had become catastrophic. Children born with polydactyly, extra fingers and toes, severe intellectual disabilities, and cranial malformations consistent with microcephaly are documented in county medical records from the Coal Creek Clinic. The isolation of the Blackburn-Harper clan wasn't merely geographical. Equally important roles were played by cultural factors. Widespread distrust of government institutions was seen in Appalachia during the post-Civil War period. For families like the Blackburns, who had fought for the Confederacy, this suspicion ran especially deep. Significantly matters the historical context when understanding how such communities formed and persisted. Industrialization and rapid social change were brought to America by the late 19th century, leaving many traditional communities feeling threatened. In the case of the Blackburns, this retreat from modernity became literal, with each generation venturing less frequently into contact with outsiders. These families created self-sufficient microcosms, explains cultural anthropologist Dr. Margaret Wilson. They developed their own internal economies, social hierarchies, and even distinct dialects. A form of English so altered that even other Kentucky Highlanders struggled to comprehend it is described in contemporary accounts of the Blackburn-Harper clan. This extreme isolation was facilitated by the geographical features of eastern Kentucky. For hundreds of miles extend the labyrinthine cave systems of Harlan County, creating natural refuges inaccessible to outsiders unfamiliar with their twisting passages. That the area inhabited by the clan contained over 40 cave entrances, many leading to chambers capable of housing small groups, is documented by geological surveys from 1922. Not just shelter, but a means of evading any unwanted contact was provided by these caves. A failed attempt to conduct a census of the area is documented in local law enforcement records from 1907, with the county sheriff reporting that clan members vanished into the earth itself when officials approached their settlements. To their unusual habitat, the clan's subsistence patterns adapted. Small plots of corn and potatoes in the limited arable land were maintained, according to agricultural records, but they increasingly relied on cave-adapted resources. Unique breeds of pale, blind chickens in the cave chambers were raised by them, the abundant bat populations were hunted for protein, and fungi on the cave walls were cultivated, practices documented by agricultural extension agent Thomas Wilson during a rare cooperative encounter in 1908. That the physical characteristics which so disturbed outside observers were predictable results of genetic inheritance patterns is what modern science reveals most clearly. With syndactyly and ectrodactyly aligned the claw-like hands described in historical accounts, a condition where the central digits are missing and the hand appears split. From hip dysplasia, another condition that increases in frequency with consanguinity, likely resulted the distinctive gait mentioned repeatedly. Perhaps most significant was the adaptive behavior to cave living. Human physiology can adapt remarkably to environmental pressures within just a few generations, notes Dr. Garrison. The accounts of clan members who rarely emerged into daylight describe classic symptoms of troglomorphism, reduced pigmentation, enhanced hearing and smell, and visual sensitivity to light, adaptations we typically associate with cave-dwelling species. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. One of America's most extreme documented cases of genetic isolation is represented by the Blackburn-Harper clan, but it wasn't unique. Throughout Appalachia during this period, numerous genetic islands were created by geographical isolation combined with cultural factors. The additional element of cave adaptation distinguished this particular community, creating a population that literally lived between two worlds, the surface society they had rejected and the subterranean realm they had embraced. By 1912, throughout eastern Kentucky had spread the reputation of the cave demons. Sensationalized accounts of encounters with clan members began to be published by local newspapers, including the Harlan Daily Enterprise, established in 1901. While much of this reporting was exaggerated, increasing tensions between the clan and surrounding communities are confirmed by court records from the period. In March 1912 occurred the first significant confrontation, when a hunting party from Coal Creek claimed to have been assaulted by deformed figures emerging from a cave entrance near Clover Fork. Though no serious injuries were reported, a wave of fear was sparked through neighboring settlements. To investigate, the Harlan County Sheriff's Office dispatched a 6-man posse, resulting in the first official documentation of the clan's living conditions. We proceeded approximately 3 miles into the cave system before encountering crude dwellings, Deputy Sheriff James Hawkins wrote in his report. The inhabitants had clearly fled deeper upon our approach. The living quarters we discovered can scarcely be described as suitable for human habitation. They consisted of rough shelters constructed from timbers and canvas, illuminated by tallow candles that cast eerie shadows on the limestone walls. Most disturbing to Hawkins and his men were the artifacts they discovered. Crude ledgers documenting family lineages that demonstrated disturbing patterns of intermarriage between close relatives were among their possessions. Handwritten notes, barely legible, revealed a belief system that considered their isolation and intermarriage as a form of purification, repeatedly referencing keeping the bloodline unmixed and preserving what remains pure in this corrupted world. If you've ever wondered how isolated communities could descend into such genetic devastation, type "The Bloodline Tells All" in the comments. Your voice helps us continue uncovering America's hidden history. A distorted interpretation of both religious principles and the concept of good breeding that was prevalent in the early 20th century is what historians now recognize the clan's belief system represented. Across America saw this period the rise of eugenics, with many states implementing sterilization laws for those deemed unfit, explains Dr. Wilson. Ironically, while mainstream society was concerned with preventing the reproduction of those with disabilities, the Blackburn-Harper clan had developed their own inverse ideology, viewing their distinctive traits as markers of special status. Not just genetic consequences, but a completely alternative worldview had been created by the clan's isolation. That by the third generation, clan members believed the physical manifestations of their inbreeding represented the emergence of a new kind of human adapted to life away from the corrupting influence of modern society was revealed by documents recovered from the caves. With this belief system became intertwined theological elements. Fragments of biblical texts found in the caves show heavy annotation around passages relating to chosen peoples and separation from nations. In his 1909 journal, Reverend McPhersonin, who made several attempts to minister to the clan, noted that they had developed a messianic ideology centered around Ezekiel Blackburn's youngest son, Isaiah, who reportedly exhibited the most extreme physical differences and rarely emerged from the deepest cave chambers. From school teacher Abigail Foster comes the most comprehensive contemporary account, who in 1911 encountered a young clan member named Sarah Harper at the edge of Coal Creek. Trained in the progressive educational methods of the era, Foster spent several weeks gaining Sarah's trust before being permitted to record her story. Sarah speaks of those who live in the deep places with a mixture of reverence and fear, Foster wrote. She describes rituals conducted in the largest cave chamber where family members with the most pronounced physical differences are treated as prophets. They apparently interpret the formations of stalactites as divine messages and have developed complex systems for reading meaning into the patterns of mineral deposits. Insight into the clan's perception of outsiders is also provided by Foster's account. They believe that the outside world is experiencing a gradual decay and that only those who have retreated into the earth will survive what they call the coming cleansing. Genuinely confused seemed Sarah when Foster explained basic concepts of modern medicine, repeatedly asking why outsiders would want to corrupt the bloodline with weakness. A self-perpetuating cycle was created by this alternative cosmology, developed in isolation and reinforced by observable physical differences between clan members and outsiders. More committed to the practice of consanguinity became each generation, viewing the resulting conditions not as disabilities but as evolutionary adaptations to their chosen lifestyle. What we see in the Blackburn-Harper case is how quickly human communities can develop entirely different interpretations of reality when isolated from mainstream knowledge, notes Dr. Thomas Richards, historian at the University of Kentucky. Within just 3 generations, they had created a complete inversion of values regarding genetic health, reframing what medical science would classify as disabilities as spiritual gifts. In October 1912 came the turning point for the Blackburn-Harper clan, following an unusually dry summer that affected their cave water supply. Forced to venture further from their traditional territories to access water sources, clan members had increasing encounters with local mining operations that had expanded into the region. A confrontation at a Kentucky River Coal Company mining camp on October 7, 1912, is documented in county records, when several clan members attempted to access a spring that had been incorporated into the mine's water system. Confronting individuals of such unusual appearance that several workers fled the scene, believing them to be something other than human, is described in the mine foreman's report. The involvement of state authorities was triggered by this incident. On October 15, 1912, a joint operation between state police and public health officials to investigate the situation was authorized by Kentucky Governor James McCreary. The first comprehensive outside intervention into the clan's isolated world was represented by the resulting expedition, led by Dr. Arthur Childress of the State Board of Health. A disturbing picture of the conditions they encountered is painted by the expedition's findings, documented in over 60 pages of reports now housed in the Kentucky State Archives. We proceeded approximately 5 miles into the cave system, documenting evidence of habitation throughout, wrote Dr. Childress. The further we ventured, the more primitive the living conditions became. In the deepest chambers, we encountered individuals who appeared to have never been exposed to daylight, their skin almost translucent and their eyes seemingly adapted to the perpetual darkness. The full extent of the genetic consequences was revealed by the medical examinations conducted during this intervention. Of the 42 clan members documented, 27 exhibited significant physical anomalies consistent with recessive genetic disorders. 14 were classified as having severe intellectual impairments, while 19 displayed skeletal deformities that limited mobility. Perhaps most concerning were the 9 youngest children, all of whom exhibited multiple conditions, including congenital heart defects, vision abnormalities, and neurological symptoms. Significant challenges were faced by the state's intervention. Deeper into unexplored cave sections fled many clan members, while others actively resisted removal. How older clan members expressed genuine terror at the prospect of leaving the caves, shielding their eyes from even the minimal light of our lamps and communicating in hushed tones that outside air would poison them, is described in the expedition journals. Among historians remain controversial the ethical dimensions of the intervention. While contemporary accounts framed it as a humanitarian rescue, whether the state's actions respected the clan's autonomy has been questioned by modern scholars. By 1912 standards, the state acted with unusual restraint, focusing on providing medical care rather than criminalization, notes Dr. Richards. However, there was still an underlying paternalism and a complete dismissal of the clan's own worldview and choices. The deeply ingrained belief system was the most challenging aspect for authorities to address. Conviction that their physical conditions represented spiritual evolution rather than medical problems was expressed by clan members who could communicate with the expedition team. We are becoming like the caves themselves, our skin like the pale stone, our eyes seeing beyond light, our bodies shaped by the true world beneath, an expedition member recorded an elder stating. For those clan members who were relocated to state facilities, the transition proved traumatic. High mortality rates among clan members in the first months after relocation are documented in medical records from the Eastern State Hospital in Lexington. To a combination of pre-existing health conditions and profound psychological distress at separation from their familial environment were these deaths attributed by Dr. Childress. From Malcolm Harper comes the most detailed first-hand account of this transition, one of the few clan members who eventually adapted to life outside the caves. In interviews conducted for the Federal Writers Project in 1938, Harper described the experience. The light was the worst, like knives in my eyes for months, and the noise never stopped. But hardest was knowing we'd been separated forever from the deep places where our ancestors spoke to us through the stone. Rare insight into how the clan members perceived themselves is provided by Harper's testimony. We never thought we were sick or wrong-made. In the caves, those you called deformed were our guides, who could sense where water flowed through stone and hear the earth shifting long before tremors came. Out here, they were just broken people to be pitied. Effectively ended by the state's intervention was the clan's isolated existence, though historical records suggest some members escaped the expedition and may have continued living in more remote cave systems. Signs of human habitation in previously unexplored cave chambers were occasionally noted by geological surveys conducted in the 1930s, though no direct contact was documented. Eventually faded from public memory, the story of Kentucky's cave demons, preserved mainly in local folklore and obscure historical records. Not until the early 1970s did academic interest in the case revive, when genetic researcher Dr. Robert Ellison discovered Dr. Childress's reports while researching patterns of recessive disorders in Appalachian communities. At least 16 distinct inherited conditions that appeared in the Blackburn-Harper clan have been identified by modern genetic analysis, including forms of osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bone disease, Waardenburg syndrome, affecting pigmentation and hearing, and phenylketonuria, a metabolic disorder affecting cognitive development. The documentation of how these conditions manifested and progressed over multiple generations of consanguinity is what makes this case particularly significant to modern science. One of the most comprehensive historical records of compounding genetic effects is provided by the Blackburn-Harper case, explains Dr. Garrison. Each generation showed more pronounced manifestations as recessive alleles became increasingly concentrated in the family line. It's essentially a documented case study of what genetic science would predict in such isolated conditions. Complex in modern Kentucky remains the cultural legacy of this history. Though few connect these stories to the actual historical events, many residents of Harlan County still reference cave people in local folklore. The limestone caves themselves, now partly incorporated into the Cumberland Gap National Historical Park, contain protected archaeological sites where evidence of the clan's habitation has been documented and preserved by the National Park Service. Perhaps the most important legacy is educational. As a case study on genetic isolation and consanguinity, the Blackburn-Harper case now appears in medical textbooks. We present this historical case to students not as a curiosity, but as an important lesson in how quickly genetic diversity can be compromised in isolated populations and how cultural factors can interact with biological ones to create a health crisis, notes Dr. Jessica Montgomery, who teaches medical genetics at the University of Louisville. Relevant remain the ethical questions raised by this history. How should society balance respect for cultural autonomy with intervention in harmful practices? When does isolation become a public health concern? According to the standards of their time, the Kentucky authorities of 1912 answered these questions. But whether different approaches might have been possible continue to be debated by modern ethicists. What remains undisputed is that profound suffering was created by the consequences of consanguinity over multiple generations. Chronic pain, developmental disabilities, and shortened lifespans are documented in medical records from those clan members who received treatment. Just 32 years was the average life expectancy among relocated clan members, with many of the children documented in 1912 not surviving to adulthood. Through the clear lens of genetic science are now understood the physical conditions that once caused fear and superstition among neighboring communities. Syndactyly and ectrodactyly reflected the claw-like hands described in historical accounts. From various forms of craniofacial dysostosis resulted the distinctive facial features. Ocular albinism and related conditions affecting the retina represented the sensitivity to light that kept many clan members in the deepest cave chambers. Perhaps most poignantly, predictable manifestations of recessive genetic disorders affecting neurological development are now recognized as the cognitive disabilities that led outsiders to view many clan members as less than human, conditions that today are often manageable with appropriate medical care and support. Beneath the Appalachian Mountains still wind the limestone caves that once sheltered the clan. Their darkness is now studied by geologists and speleologists rather than inhabited by isolated families. Yet, profound insights into our nature as both biological and cultural beings are offered by the human story that unfolded within those passages, how isolation shapes communities, how beliefs can reframe disability, and how quickly human groups can diverge when separated from shared knowledge. If you've watched until this point, it's because you appreciate the depth and honesty of our historical investigations. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end," so I can get to know you and understand who truly appreciates the stories on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe for more hidden American histories. Give this video a thumbs up if you found it informative and share it with others who appreciate learning about the complex realities of our past that textbooks often overlook. Into history may have disappeared the most cursed clans of Kentucky, but the scientific and ethical questions they raise continue to resonate. That human communities are fragile systems, requiring the balance of new genetic material and fresh ideas to thrive, is what their story reminds us. And that isolation, whether geographical or ideological, carries costs that compound with each passing generation.